Hey everybody, how we doing? It's Monday, it's not Tuesday. It's Monday, right? It's Monday. Okay, I'll let you all get here. I love this moment where I just talk to nobody. It's really my favorite part of the whole thing. I'm so excited for our special guest today. Hello, Patty. Perfect. And look who is about to join us, Steven. Hello. Can you hear me? Oh, you left. You're coming back. Okay, he's coming back. He's coming back. 1 second. Can y'all hear me? I hope y'all can hear me. That would be amazing, right? If I'm just sitting here talking to myself and nobody can hear anything. Won't that be a fun hour? Okay, here we go. Connecting with Steven.
Hello?
Yay!
Okay.
Success.
I thought I'd be clever and use like Bluetooth headsets, but it doesn't seem to work, so.
I know, as soon as I saw them on you, I was like, oh, maybe I should have done that.
Yeah.
Just step up a bit.
It's so good to see you.
So good to see you, and thank
Yeah.
you for joining us. I feel like we're going to have a very captive audience today, and I'm very excited. And the captive audience is also going to be me.
I think it'll be fun. I'm also just looking forward to talking to someone.
Truth, right?
Yeah,
Like,
this
yeah,
isolation's been hard, but it's very necessary, and I hope everyone is doing their part and staying home.
agreed, agreed. It's I know I'm getting, not personally for me, because we're certainly doing our part. I'm getting nervous for the general population as it gets nicer and nicer and nicer outside.
Yeah.
That scares me. But
Yeah.
anyway. So, Stephen, do you want to give, if people are here, I guarantee they know who you are, but do you want to give just like a little introduction about who you are, what you do, how fabulous you are, and then we'll get into some Q&A?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Steven, Steven Ko. I'm a cosmetic formulator. And what that means is I formulate cosmetics. So that's like looking at what ingredients go in, how those ingredients affect the texture, how they affect, the effects that they have on the skin. So I've been working in the industry for quite some time now. I started in my second year of university. Got lucky through, I guess, just networking and meeting someone at the university that was able to give me a job in the industry. So that's sort of where I began. But previous to that, I was like a lot of the people that are probably watching now, where, I had very severe acne, and I would always look at like the back of products and like look at the ingredients and try to figure out like which ingredients were triggers for me, this thing and that. And that really sort of like sparked my interest in chemistry and science, and a little bit of like chemical engineering. And it wasn't until university that I was kind of like, oh, like this is actually a job that people do and like make money and like can do for a living. So that was really interesting because I'd actually originally gone to school for journalism.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I wanted to be a journalist, and then like when I kind of lost interest in that, I was like, maybe I could be like an architect. So I applied to like architecture. So it wasn't only until later that I was like, I should probably do something in like chemistry or biology or that sort of thing. So
Well, awesome. I think
yeah,
everybody's glad that you chose that route.
yeah. I'll be quite frank and say that like I'm not like the smartest person. I'm generally not the smartest person in the room, and chemistry does not come easily to me, and like math especially as well. But if you find something that you really enjoy, then the time that you spend in that, like maybe things would click faster for someone else, then like it's really worth it. So that's kind of why I really enjoy social media, because I've seen like so many people like message me, and what they'll say is like, oh my God, I never realized that like chemistry or math or like whatever has implications in beauty. And like, I wish I'd paid attention more in class. And to that, I would say like, it's never too late. There's
Right.
so many free resources online to like just learn basic chemistry, basic physics, even some math. So like if you have that interest and it's been sparked by beauty, I think just go chase it. It's never too late.
You know what? Remember that, everybody. It's a great point because also to say that, like, I never feel like I'm the smartest person in the room. I don't think you should. I think you should surround yourself with people that are smarter than you.
Yeah.
But also that it doesn't come easy to you. I feel that way. I felt that way in the ballet, and I always felt like the people in the ballet that were the most talented were the people that maybe it didn't come 100%. They had natural talent certainly, but it wasn't a walk in the park, and they had to put in the effort, and they had to put in the work and the ability, and to learn. And same thing with skin and skincare and formulating. And so yeah, no, I think that's a very important lesson.
Yeah. Like I get a lot of messages like, "Oh my God, you're so smart," and like it's very very nice, but like it takes a lot of time and like years and years of reading and remembering, and like I'm always refreshing because like my memory's not great either. So yeah, it's like you can look at people at a certain place and be like, oh, like they're just who they are and like that's who they are, but like anyone can get there. It just takes time and like whether or not that's worth it to you or not.
Well, yeah, very true. So we got a great group of questions, and I wanted to
Mhm.
keep it more topic oriented so we can hit on things that have been major questions that have come up either a lot in talks with myself, questions that I get from customers, or things that I just see prevalent on your page, or anybody else's page in the industry. And then just have a chat about that. Obviously, we're coming from two different aspects, right? Like I would say you're coming from the lab and I'm coming from the treatment room, which I adore. Like that's one of my favorite things in the world is to always be talking to a chemist and to hear sort of things that you see or feel or hear, and then what I see, feel, or hear in a completely different environment, doing something completely different, but that actually has the same goal in mind. So I love that, and I'm super excited to chat with you. With that being said, okay, so the first question, which it comes up all the time, it's the great debate, but is should anhydrous or large molecular weight topicals be applied last in a routine?
So this one's a little bit tricky because it's going to depend on every formulation and the ingredient itself, right? So I think generally when we're talking like larger molecular ingredients, we're usually talking like a polymer, so like hyaluronic acid. So hyaluronic acid is like a group of molecules that gets repeated into this like larger structure. And that larger structure is what gives it like the sort of the water binding effect, that like gelling effect, but also that like pilling effect. So what pilling is something called delamination. So if you think of like a net and you throw it out and like it lands smoothly and flat, that's sort of what happens with HA when you're spreading it on your skin. And then imagine if you're sort of like rolling that net up, it turns into like a ball and a clump. So that's sort of what happens with pilling. So I think generally the advice with using larger molecular things and like heavier products last is that generally those are the formulas and ingredients that like are at most risk of pilling. So putting them last means that you're gonna like disturb them less. When it comes to skin penetration of like actives and that sort of thing, again, it really depends on the ingredient itself. So I've seen experiments where they actually use, let's say, a moisturizer before applying a topical corticosteroid, which is like a very powerful anti-inflammatory. And what they found was actually applying the moisturizer first, actually increase the penetration of the corticosteroid, where generally I think the skincare advice would be to like use your active first, so it's like closest to your skin, and then your things afterwards. So the evidence doesn't always confirm that, but there's also not a lot of evidence. So they looked at corticosteroids because it's a drug and it's important that people use it properly and that sort of thing. They're not really going to look at that for like your vitamin E or like a specific product, unless they pay for that experiment. So I think people's guidance is people's guidance. Do what feels right for you. Do what's the most convenient for you. I don't think in the end it really makes that big of a difference. If you were only going to apply these products like once in your life, then yeah, like maximizing the efficiency of it is super important. But I think for most of us, like we're going to be using it at least for like a month, I would say. So, like losing 10% efficiency, let's say, or like gaining 10% efficiency over that long period of time, um, I don't think it's going to have a really big influence.
Love that. Love
Yeah.
that, sir. Which I'm going to quickly switch into just because this is not quickly switch into, just add on to this. Um, because this is something I get all the time. And I love talking about it because at the end of the day, I'm like, have fun with it. Whatever you want to do, I would do it this way. Do you? But it's oil first and then moisturizer, or moisturizer first and then oil. And I know that's like, again, another loaded, it depends on the formulation question. But I guess first, what would you personally do? And then separately, what would you say to?
So I think I would probably say do oil first and then moisturizer. But then when I think about it, it's generally actually the opposite way around. And the reason for that is because like I'll put on my moisturizer first, and then if my skin feels still dry or like tight, then I'll generally put an oil on top of that. Um, as you said, it really depends on the formulation. There was one experiment that sort of looked at actually the order of product application, like using a toner first and then a moisturizer, or like a moisturizer then toner, and then so on. Um, they actually found like no difference when it came to skin moisturization or water loss through the skin, transepidermal water loss, which is like the water that evaporates out of your skin, and you generally want to slow that down. Um, so in terms of like looking at skin hydration, they didn't really find much of a difference. When it comes to skin penetration, just based on the few studies that I've seen with topical drugs, um, there probably isn't much of a difference either. And in fact, using something oily or a moisturizer first with a lot of oil might actually enhance skin penetration for certain actives that are likely water oil soluble. But then the opposite of that also happens, which like there's an experiment where they looked at retinoic acid, tretinoin,
Mhm.
and what they found is that if they used a vehicle, the base, which was just oil, versus like a cream or emulsion or like even propylene glycol, the oil actually delivered the least. And the reason for that, they think, is that the tretinoin dissolves in oil very easily, so it kind of like stayed in the oil as opposed to going into the skin.
Uh,
So again, it's like your mileage is going to really vary. I think it's just do what you think is most comfortable for you.
exactly.
The only corollary, or not corollary, the only compound I would say would be sunscreen. Sunscreens are tested on bare skin, clean skin, so they don't take into account like you applying a moisturizer first or like an oil first or that sort of thing. There have been experiments where they looked at that. What they found is like sometimes it increases the SPF or protection, sometimes it decreases, but generally it decreases the water resistance because those film formers can't bind to your skin as well. So I think my recommendation for that would be like whether you use your oil first or your moisturizer, just make sure your skin's not like sopping wet or like greasy. If you wouldn't be comfortable putting foundation on top and like having that foundation stay and like not be like smudged everywhere, I would apply that to the sunscreen as well. So yeah.
No, I love that. And a really great distinction with sunscreen specific as well, because that is very important. And people have started messing around with sunscreen now and adding things to sunscreen. And that's, I'm all for cocktailing products, but with sunscreen, I'm like, leave it alone, please. Just put sunscreen on your face. And to your point too, like, yes, not a sopping wet face that's covered in product.
Yeah,
Um,
and like the thing with sunscreen also to remember is like you're not canceling the SPF for like photo protection. You're probably just like reducing it
right.
to some extent. So like it's not the end of the world if you've been doing this, but it's just something to be a little bit more mindful of, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you are somebody who, I think a lot of people, it is their security blanket,
Mhm.
sunscreen, and especially if they really are on a prescription retin-A or a high percentage acid or doing peels regularly or lasers. And so, yeah, I think it's good for people to at least know, like you said, it's not the end of the world, but to know that like it
Yeah,
happens and it can reduce it.
yeah.
Um, okay, so I don't know if it's worth going into, but the next question I have on my list, which you so eloquently just talked about, but might be worth repeating, is does order in which you apply products actually affect their efficacy? And
So,
I just talked
mhm.
about that, but
So I guess to like sum that up, likely yes, it does, but we don't know. and it's gonna depend on each formulation. So you know, I think my best advice is like do what makes and feels the best for you. Do what doesn't cause pilling. Do Yeah, just do what feels right for you. I think it's tough to really give an answer that like putting on your moisturizer before an oil-based active is always going to make it better, or like always going to reduce it or cancel it out or whatever, all that stuff. It really depends on each specific ingredient, um, and like we don't have that data, we don't have that information, and generally, when we do experiments or like you look at experiments that study the effects of active ingredients, they're really just looking at that ingredient alone in a vehicle. And the reason behind that is like in an experiment, you want to reduce the amount of variables as much as possible. So adding more products into that or like different ingredients or formulations is going to complicate things because you're looking at people using the same formulation over like 60 days, 90 days, even 30 days. And like, what if one person forgets to like apply their moisturizer before using the formula under study? That's going to affect all your data, right? So you want to keep things as simple as possible, and keeping in mind that like you got to pay these people to do these experiments, so it's like it's expensive. So the data that we have is generally like very specific to that one thing, which as a person that uses skincare, I understand it's like it's frustrating to not have that guidance. But I think what you can be sure about is that like it's not going to have a huge impact. You're not wasting your money. You're not wasting the active ingredient. The effect is probably going to be relatively minimal, if there even is one. So like, if your favorite guru recommends doing it this way and like you find that it works for you, then like keep doing it. I think it's fine.
I love that because as a creative person my entire life, dancer, and now in the skincare world, I love playing around with my skincare, even if it's something super wacky that I know might mess up my skin. I like sort of experimenting on myself. Again, nothing dangerous. I'm not taking, no like professional strength, anything. I mean, I could, I'm a professional, but I'm not playing around with that. I'm just playing around with order, always keeping SPF last, of course. So take that out of the equation for now. But everything else, like I love playing around and just seeing sort of what works for me and what fits for me. And I do encourage that with people when, even if, for instance, it's something about like an oil or a moisturizer or the order they want to do it, like I would just encourage playing, because you'll probably find something that you really, really love. And to your point, if there is, right, somebody you follow who says this way or the highway and you trust them, then go with that. And if for some reason though you're not seeing the result you would like, you could also play around with it and see if something else works differently and better.
And, and something you touched on there, which is like seeing the results. I think that's also tricky because like with a lot of these ingredients, there is no like instant effect. When you're talking like skin hydration and like plumping and like glow, that can be an instant effect. But if you're looking at like the effect of like increasing the penetration of like niacinamide or retinol, you're not going to see that until, or like really the full effects of that like months down the line. And you have nothing to compare it to, besides your memory, which is like not the greatest. So it's kind of tricky. So like I think like I would hope people like don't stress themselves out too much about this stuff because in the end of the day it doesn't really matter. I think it can kind of lead to really like anxiety induced thinking. I certainly had these sort of issues with like food, which was like like following those like combination diets and like eating at the right time and like maximizing my gains or whatever. At the end of the day, like I didn't really notice much of a difference in terms of like my energy level or health or like gains or whatever. And now that I'm sort of just like eating healthy, but like being a little bit more relaxed about it, I'm personally a lot happier. So I think for some people, like skincare might be entering that territory. And if it is, then like if it's not adding enjoyment to your life, I think it's time to like maybe take a step back and like reevaluate what it is doing for you. If you're trying to use skincare to like treat a condition like acne or like melasma or that sort of thing, I would say like it's probably time to go seek a professional's advice, whether that be like an esthetician or a dermatologist. And I understand like with that too, like A, it's expensive, and like B, like the quality and benefits run the gamut. But I think at that time, it's time to get some like extra help. Your skincare might not be enough for you at that point.
Agreed. And two very strong points. First being skincare should be this, I mean, really, in the way the world is today, especially,
Yeah,
it needs to be I mean, our post today on Instagram too, was it like it needs to be this lovely, fun thing. And yeah, if it enters that territory, like, yeah, take a step back, reassess. And of course, the Italian American in me always comes out with the like Bella Figura, and same way with food too. I know, I mean, I remember our trip to Italy when it's like portions are right. I'm not really caring what I'm eating or drinking so much. I mean, I'm being mindful of it certainly, but it's enjoyable and you're eating for pleasure or you're doing skincare for pleasure. Like I was feeling great, you know, and I think that really is, I mean, it goes above and beyond that too. That's just skimming the surface of what we're talking about, but I think it's really important. Two, severe rosacea, acne, psoriasis, eczema, yes, all those things should be under the care of a professional, absolutely.
yeah,
And yeah, and right, the skincare might be not doing enough.
yeah.
Uh,
And that's not to say that like skincare doesn't do anything.
no,
You can get a lot of impact from skincare. It's just there's certain things that like we have topical drugs and like treatments, whether those be devices like energy, lasers, that sort of thing that like work very, very well. So like, instead of going through that whole process of like finding a routine or whatever that works for you, there's like maybe a quick solution out there that would save you a lot of stress. Like I get messages from people that are literally like really, really long and sort of like, am I doing this wrong? Is like, like, should I reorganize these steps? And like, I really just want to like reach out and give these people a hug because like I can feel their stress and I know where that stress is coming from because like I've been in that same position. But at the end of the day, like having a perfect routine like isn't gonna make you feel better in the way that you're hoping. So I think generally our skin is pretty good at taking care of itself, and like if you've got good products and you can like kick everything up a notch, to quote Emerald Lagasse.
Throwback.
But yeah, it shouldn't be keeping you up at night, and like it shouldn't be worrying you to this extent, and it should be fun. It should be fun.
Yeah, I love that. And very important and very true. Um, okay, so let's talk a little. Okay, I like this one actually. I'm skipping one. I'm skipping. We'll come back to it, but I want to go to
Okay.
this one. I actually really liked the question. Um, I avoid this, but I'm curious to hear you talk about it. But somebody asked, are there different grades to fragrance in skincare in terms of how irritating it can be? Um, I'm assuming for this, because they put fragrance, I'm assuming they're talking synthetic fragrance and not essential oil. I mean, I also personally have topically issues with essential oils. I'm not saying they're bad or no. It's just I'm a very sensitive complexion and very sensitive individual.
Yeah.
But I think for the first part of this, we could talk like fragrance, synthetic fragrance.
So I think the important thing to understand is that like a reaction is caused by your body's immune system reacting to a chemical, and fragrances are often complex mixtures of like many different chemicals. So there isn't like a molecule is a molecule. Its effects and like properties are defined by its structure. So there isn't like a more pure molecule. There can be a more pure mixture, which means like you have more of that one molecule and like less contaminants, they're called. So there aren't necessarily like an allergen-free grade of fragrances. There are certainly some chemicals that are fragrances that tend to cause more sensitization. So if you actually do go to a dermatologist and you do suspect that you have like a fragrance allergy or sensitivity, they can do patch tests on you where they prick your skin and then apply some of these fragrance compounds. And they actually come in mixes. So it's like fragrance mix one is like eugenol, like all these different chemicals. And those are commonly found in different like commercial fragrances. So like obviously the best way to get an answer is to do that patch testing. I understand in the US like it's a little bit more expensive to get this done, and like I think even in Canada you have to pay for that process. But if a brand is marketing their product as like a higher quality fragrance that like isn't going to cause allergies, I would still test it on yourself first, like maybe somewhere innocuous before going ahead and using it everywhere, because that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's like not going to cause problems. Um, our immune system is amazing. It can do thousands of things, and it's like constantly protecting us. But sometimes it does mess up, and sometimes it does trigger, and it triggers overboard when it doesn't need to. So I mean, you know, there's people that have like allergies to sunlight. There's people that have allergies to like proteins found in meat. There's people that have you know, allergic reactions to even like water touching their skin. So like the purity or like naturalness or, you know, higher grade of a fragrance doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be completely safe for someone that has like an allergy to it. That being said, for most people, we don't have the sort of like sensitization or allergic reactions to fragrances. So I don't think it needs to be as scary as some people make it. You know, if you're allergic to peanuts, then yes, like peanuts are very, very deadly.
Right.
But it doesn't mean like peanuts are deadly. It means that peanuts are deadly if you have an allergy to them. And that's the same for fragrances.
Interesting. I like that.
I hope that answers the question. I don't.
No, it does. I mean, no, I think you completely answered the question, and you also went above and beyond. And I love it too, because I'm somebody that I would steer clear of fragrance and most essential oils in my skincare, just because obviously I formulate that way too, or
Yeah.
not, but co-formulate with a chemist. But it's something that I just, yeah, I am fairly reactive to. And then at the end of the day, it's also unnecessary, right? Like it's a lovely component too. And yes, I love opening up and smelling something lovely. And I love my perfumes. Don't get me wrong, I have like 6,000. I'm probably going to order 2 more tonight because I'm addicted to scent. But
Yeah.
I, yeah, I usually don't use it on my skin. But there are a few skincare products out there that do have fragrance in them that I love. And I've actually like tiptoed around them. So maybe I should give it a go again and see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just up to you and like what you're comfortable with. I know from like market research data, I generally people say they don't want fragrances, but when they're actually presented with the choice of having a product that's fragrance and one that's not, when you look at a population group, a lot of them choose the fragrance. So that's why a lot of these like luxury skincare lines still contain fragrance in them,
Yeah.
because they find that their customers actually prefer them. Um, so yeah, I personally do use products with fragrance. There's some that I wish didn't come fragrance because they smell a little bit too strong.
Yeah.
But like you know, I'm a person that's quite lucky in the sense that like I don't get much sensitization or irritation from that. But you know your skin best, and if it's easier to just avoid fragrances as a general rule for you,
Yeah.
then like that's fine, you know? Like no
Right.
one's forcing you to buy things, no one's forcing you to use things. You're allowed to make choices. But so are brands, and some brands choose to use fragrances, and like that's fine. Just like don't put your money there.
I was going to say that's actually a really important thing, is to tell people that, right, a brand, yes, can make their own choices, but then so can you. So yeah, you can be bummed that maybe they're using fragrance or not, or whatever your choice is, but right, you don't have to choose to support it. So
Yeah.
absolutely. Oh wait, and we got that one.
Hi,
Okay, wait.
Renee.
Hey, Renee.
Sorry,
Uh,
I'm sort of like trying to read the comments, but
I know it's always like, I try to like, you can read the comments, I'll stay on with the phone.
they're going by so fast. There's so many people here.
Okay, so the next one, which I feel like is going to be another, not large one to tackle, but just sort of myths and myth busting around comedogenic products or ingredients, excuse me, I should say. And just little sort of your thoughts on it, and ingredients that you maybe have heard about that people still to this day talk about as comedogenic and aren't. And
Oh, Renee Rouleau's here as well.
double Renee love. I love
So comedogenicity is a tough one. So I know online there's like a lot of charts that are like these ingredients are comedogenic and they give them a rating. So I'm pretty comfortable saying that like most of that data is quite old. And like a lot of that data is collected from something called like the rabbit ear test. So Rabbit ears actually have a lot of pores and like oil producing glands in their ears. So they were used as to use a scientific term, like a substrate to test the comedogenicity of ingredients. So what they would do is like they would put the ingredient on the rabbit's ears at like a pure concentration, so 100%. And then I guess they would probably like apply it, you know, like 5 days in a row, and then like count the amount of like clogged pores that had formed on the rabbit ears. Um, Later research has sort of tried to like replicate that with human skin, and what they found is like the rabbit ear data doesn't always match up with what happens with a human. And then you also have to consider that like you know the ingredients in your formula, they're not being used at 100% concentration. So something that like might block your pores if you use a pure and like quite a thick layer like may not cause an issue if it's been like emulsified into a formulation and is used at like a lower percentage. There is a myth that like petrolatum or like Vaseline molecules are like large enough to block your pores, um, and that's actually not the case. So a carbon-carbon bond. So like petrolatum is made up of like carbon chains, like chained together, is 1.42 angstroms on average, and that's about 142 picometers. So if you have like 12 of them chained together, um, you know, it's about 1/100,000th of the width of like the thinnest human hair. It's absolutely tiny. Like you can't actually use light to observe it. You need to use like special equipment that shoots out like electrons to like even look at a molecule up close. Um, Unless you're like very very blessed, most of us can like see our pores with our naked eyes. So like I think right there it should tell you that like a Vaseline molecule cannot clog like physically block the pore. It's like it's just way too small. Um, Obviously, like you know, when you have a large collection of it, it can start to clog pores and like build up and like grow bacteria and like maybe eventually cause inflammation, which would eventually lead to acne. But it's really going to be like very personal, and it's going to depend on the concentration. Um, as a rule, generally, what I try to recommend for someone that is acne prone is to like stay away from ingredients with a very high melting point. So like that would be like oils and waxes that are like solid at body temperature. And the reason for that is that like if it's solid like on your skin, then it's more likely that it's not going to be able to like flow or like move or get rinsed away. But even then, I would say that's not like a very strong rule of thumb. Um, you kind of just have to like test it and find out, which is really annoying. I know a lot of products market themselves as like oil free and this and that. Um, but like if you look at Reddit and like if you look online, you'll see like a lot of people had a lot of benefits from using like straight up oil on their skin, even though that they had acne. So it's really going to be like very your mileage is going to vary.
But I mean, that point is, I feel like something we should just, excuse me, I should have pinned this entire conversation at the bottom, which, yes, your mileage may vary or will
Yeah.
vary. Um, because,
But I think the takeaway is like those charts with like the you know the acne rating and like the irritation rating. Take them with like a very 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 large grain of salt. Um, you know, obviously if you're like super acne prone and like acne is something that's causing you like a lot of psychological stress, and you're very unhappy with it, then like it's not a bad way to shop, I guess, in terms of like the products that you're using. But like I don't think following it is gonna fix everything either, and I don't think like not following it is gonna do that much harm either.
so this is something that is not going to be necessarily a question, but I think a great thing for us to chat about and something to talk about for everybody. But saying that how it's not a bad thing to necessarily follow, take it with a grain of salt, but look at it. But also the same with the ingredient list, right? Like I know you and I have talked about this before too, where an ingredient list, people see an ingredient list online and they completely feel like they know the ins and outs, the understanding of the entire product, how it's going to be, how it's going to perform, and then they get really disappointed if it's not to this place in their imagination that they've made. And to maybe talk a little bit about how the ingredient list is sort of just a general rule of thumb, looking at severe allergies, to of course see what's in the product, but it doesn't tell the whole tale of the product and the formula. So if you could just touch on that a little bit, maybe just in terms
Yeah.
of.
Sorry. I The ingredient list is like very useful in terms of like figuring out maybe if there's an ingredient in there that might cause allergies for you. But then even then, like people with coconut allergies, they might be allergic to like a protein that's found in coconut, which isn't present in the oil, let's say. So like just because it has coconut oil and you have like a coconut allergy doesn't mean you will be allergic. Obviously, I would recommend like you don't try that, like don't test it on yourself. But like ingredients are not the INCI, International Nomenclature of Cosmetic Ingredients, is not it's not chemical names. So so like saying like linoleic acid on an ingredient list does not mean it's like pure linoleic acid in the formulation, right? So you can actually go to suppliers and buy linoleic acid that also has like 20% oleic acid and 10% something else.
Yeah.
So like a lot of times, like the ingredients on the ingredient list are actually representative of mixtures, and that's very true if you're looking at things like plant extracts, this and that. Like green tea extract could be like it could be one compound if it's like very very purified. It could be EGCG, or it could be like a mixture of like different polyphenols and like starches, sugars, whatever, all these things from green tea. So it really doesn't tell you as much information as you think it does. It's sort of like looking at the ingredient list of like a cookie or a baked good. Um, I think if you were to just pick like 10 random like chocolate chip recipes and like look at the ingredients, like and like one of them was a muffin, like I don't know if you could like actually figure out which one was the muffin, even if you were like super experienced. That's why like with food you have like the calories and like the vitamins and all that breakdown, which we don't get with cosmetics. So with like the INCI ingredient list, you also have to remember that like in the US, anything under 1% you can organize however you want. So generally like ingredients below 1%, you'll put the more marketable ingredients up at the top of that list. And then your things like thickeners like xanthan gum and your preservatives all the way down at the end. So like even the order and sort of like thinking where that 1% line, like it's really just a guess. It's fun to do. It's a fun exercise. It can be educational, but like at the end of the day, regardless of how much expertise this person has, unless they've seen that formulation and like honestly really even like looked into the production of it, it's just a guess. So like a really good example that I like to give is there's a way to encapsulate active ingredients in bubbles of fat, and these bubbles of fat are actually like very very small. They can like penetrate in your skin. They're super stable, all this stuff. But the fat is actually just stearic acid. So if you were to look at like an ingredient list, it would be like, let's say, vitamin C, ascorbic acid, and then stearic acid. So like you could look at that and just be like, oh, it's an emulsion with like stearic acid as a thickener. In reality, it could actually be stearic acid is encapsulating the vitamin C, protecting it from oxidization, and enhancing the bioavailability. But you wouldn't know that from the Inky. So like I used to write a blog 4,000 years ago where I would like look at the Inky list.
You look amazing.
Yeah. But I would like look at the Inky list and like break down like the function of each ingredient. After like 5 or 10 of those posts, like I started to realize that it's actually just like it's actually not very useful or educational, and it doesn't really help consumers make a decision of like whether they should use a product or not. It's actually more important to actually just try the product, because unfortunately at the end of the day the Inky doesn't tell you that much unless you have insight into the formulation. You're really just guessing. So
no, it's really a few things too. Is one, I see a lot of people talk about how they get frustrated online when they don't, for instance, see retinol at the top of an ingredient list. First of all, I'm thinking you don't want it at the top. Depending on what the formula is, you don't want that either. But people have been sort of, I don't say they've been educated, they've been informed to read the Inky list through and through and think that they should have all the answers from reading that ingredient list. That if it's a good formula, everything will be at the top. And, the unimportant stuff, which is wildly important stuff, like preservatives, are at the bottom of the list, but it just isn't true. And very interesting about the encapsulation because that's another sort of like, yes, you can't just. I mean, again, it's like you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't judge a formula by the ingredient list. Great starting point.
Yeah, it's a really good starting point. And to what you just said about sort of like having retinol in like, you know, the different positions on the inky, I think the problem is like, you know, like some brands do put like like you call them drop-ins, and it's just like a very tiny amount just so you can get it on the inky list.
Yeah.
So some brands do that just for like marketing purposes, but then other brands don't. And like, you know, like retinol, you don't necessarily need a lot, and there's other ingredients that you don't necessarily need a lot. So like it'll show up lower on the ingredient list. That's not the fault of the ingredient list. That's more the fault of
Right.
like I don't want to call it deceptive marketing, but like maybe marketing that puts itself in the best light possible. So, which again is like nothing wrong. It's just like I understand why people get upset about that. But like, you know, if you're buying a product that's like very inexpensive and then it doesn't exactly like list the concentrations, then you know but like again, even then there's like very inexpensive products that like do list their concentrations and like have very high impact formulations. So it really is specific to like every single formula. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say we will not continue this discussion because this will go into a much longer, larger, like dinner time, 3-hour dinner time discussion,
Yeah.
which we've had before. But okay, moving on. So we're getting sort of to the last few questions. Okay, yeah, we're good on time. Something, I think this is going to be another generalization talk because I think the question that I'm going to say to you is going to be, anyway, I'll just read it. But it says how natural preservatives like radish root ferment work. And I think mainly, I guess, in that instance, just talk more about honestly, it'd be great to talk about preservatives in general because they have been, you know, completely the enemy of everybody. Yet, to me, they could not be more necessary because then we've now seen products have actual mold in them, and which is extremely dangerous. And then two, sort of the new wave of more natural preservative systems.
Yeah, so I mean, preservatives are very important in terms of what you just said. They prevent and reduce microbial growth. So that's like bacteria, fungi, and specifically what we're looking to limit is the growth of pathogenic microbes. So those are ones that can cause infections like staph, aspergillus, fungus, this and that. Basically, so I know there's like a very large like DIY community, and a lot of preservatives come with like recommended use amounts. So what people will do is like they'll make their formulation and then like put in the recommended use amount of that preservative and assume it's preserved. You actually need to take it a step further and do something called a preservative efficacy test. And basically what that does is they take they take your formulation, they inoculate it with these pathogenic microbes, and then they actually count the death of these microbes over time, and they do it a couple times. There's different methods to do it. And basically what that proves is that your product and the preservative system is actually able to like fend off and prevent microbial growth. Most people don't have an issue with their DIY products, but if you're selling your product on the market, then you really need to be responsible for your customers' safety and like get that testing done. So preservatives work in quite a few different ways. Some of them, for example, like disrupt the lipid bilayers of microbes and some viruses. And what that does is it causes the cell or the microbe to start to leak, and then eventually those die. Other ones sort of like prevent it from getting nutrients, so like eventually those die. And like there's quite a few different mechanisms, and like I'm not an expert on that. Like that would be the job of a microbiologist, or so, like, you know, I would consult with someone like that. All I need to know is that like the formulations pass the PET, the preservative efficacy test. When it comes to natural preservatives, there's no reason why they won't work as well as like a synthetic preservative. The issue with a lot of these natural preservatives, though, is that like you need generally quite a high amount compared to a synthetic one. So like a lot of these like fermented preservative systems, you need like 1 to 2%, sometimes even. And the way that those work, so like the radish root ferment lysate, is that they're fermented by a microbe that produces cationic uh, peptides. So those are positively charged chains of amino acids. Um, and what those do is like, I think some of them like disrupt the cell membrane and cause it to like leak and die. And then some of them, I think, like basically they kill the microbes and that's what they're looking for. The thing that's tricky about some of those things is that because they're cationic, they interact with things that, which means that they have a positive charge. They interact with things that have a negative charge. So things like xanthan gum, hyaluronic acid, those are all anionic, and they bind together and then they fall out of solution. So when you mix those things together, you won't always see it, but basically you've like inactivated your preservative. So that's why it's like really important to do that testing, which doesn't mean like it can't be done. It's just like you need to do that extra step of like validating it. A lot of the synthetic preservative systems are like very robust, meaning that they're designed in a way that they work across like a broad spectrum of formulations and also a broad spectrum of microbes. You use them at like lesser amounts. They're a lot more inexpensive. And the other thing is like a lot of these companies that are producing them have been doing them for like years and years and years and years. So they're very pure, they're very high quality, they're easy to source. There isn't a lot of like variation in batch. So if you're looking like at like a natural fermented preservative, it's kind of like beer. You're sort of like culturing things and doing it like in cycles. So like one batch might have like a certain mix of peptides and like another batch might have a different mix, and that might affect the efficacy of that preservative down the line. So I think in that case, you would want to do the testing like with every batch, really just to be careful. I understand why people don't want preservatives in their product. They don't necessarily provide any skin benefits. And I know there's a lot of like information out there that they can cause like hormonal issues and like breast cancer and this and that. There's no strong scientific evidence that shows that, you know, parabens directly cause breast cancer. There's been correlations. There's a really good website called like spuriouscorrelations.com, and basically what it'll show is like you can actually track the amount of like Nicolas Cage movies, and it like perfectly tracks with like deaths by people falling into a pool. Sometimes things just correlate without like one causing the other. Obviously, it's something that like we need to look into more, which we are, and generally like the newer research is finding that they can still be categorized as safe. I think the industry, because of customer demand, will move towards more natural preservatives and things that people can recognize. One of the big ones back in the day was like grapefruit seed extract. There was like a big trend of like every natural product having grapefruit seed extract. And then there was an issue where like that grapefruit seed extract was actually contaminated with another preservative. And that was sort of why it was able to preserve the products, not because of the grapefruit seed extract. One that I think will probably become a little bit more popular going forward is actually salicylic acid. So salicylic acid, we all know, is like an exfoliant. It's good for anti-acne, but it's also a really good antimicrobial. So in research that I've seen, you can actually use like 0.15 or like 0.25% of salicylic acid, and you're able to preserve certain formulations. And I think there's also this trend towards organic acids. So things like levulinic acid, cinnamic acid, anisic acid, these are all organic, meaning they contain carbon acids that also have preservative effects. Now, a lot of times the reason why they have preservative effects is like if you actually look at the structure, they're kind of similar to parabens. So yeah, it's kind of, you know, like it's a little bit just like, just because it comes from a natural source, is it better? I don't know.
Yeah, fair
Yeah.
question. Okay, so wrapping this up, last question, which is going to be again I know what you're going to say because I'm going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think it's a good thing to finish on and to sort of reiterate a lot of the things we've been talking about. But this person asks, can you have a sensitivity to mineral sunscreen?
Um, so I mean, you can have a sensitivity to almost anything, and again, it's going to really depend on the rest of the formulation. So there are mineral sunscreens that, have a lot of like volatile ingredients. So those can be a little bit more irritating than something that's like, a little bit thicker, like has more oils and that sort of thing. In terms of actually having a reaction to like zinc oxide and titanium dioxide itself, I would say it's probably quite rare. What you might be experiencing is like, so zinc oxide and titanium dioxide are a little bit basic. Um, and because they're particles, they can be a little bit absorbent as well. So I think for some people that are very sensitive, they might find that it's like drying out their skin or like irritating it a little bit. Um, so yeah, it's totally possible. Generally, I think inorganic sunscreens like titanium dioxide and zinc oxide are recommended for those people that do have sensitive skin. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for everyone. I think if you are having issues with that, I would recommend trying like a stick formulation. So something like that comes with like a wax stick. Um, just because you're not going to run into those like volatile ingredients, and it's like a little bit more thicker, a little bit more comforting, a little bit more coating. Generally, those have like a worse white cast, but I think you might have better results there. Um, it sucks to say it again, but it's really just going to depend on the formulation. So you may just have to get samples and like try a bunch of different brands.
I agree. It can be really hard to. I have had many times where I've had, I don't want to say bad luck, but just a physical or mineral based sunscreen that just was not for me.
Yeah.
Like it was not the right formula. However, I know that I'm fine with mineral based sunscreens and I found ones that work lovely for me. So to your point, yes, you really should be trialing things. Um, Also the bigger picture too about you can react to anything. But then two, there's also the puzzle that I always sort of talk about it, and you and I have talked about this before, where somebody might have added a new sunscreen in and they think they're reacting to that because it's the only new thing they've added in. However, it's not necessarily the sunscreen. It's like for me personally, if I'm upping my retinol game, I'm going to become much more reactive to whatever I apply on my skin, even if it's some of my own products, which I know I'm absolutely fine with. And actually, that happened. We reformulated a few things last year, and that whole testing process was a bit of a nightmare because at that point I had upped my retinol game, and so every formula I was like, I don't like it. I don't like it, and I feel as if they thought I was losing my mind. But then I took a step back, let everything be, reset from that. I'm not saying like step off of retinol, but there are many different variables. And especially right now too, diet, stress. I mean, we're all under so much chronic stress that I think we don't even realize because it's not that manic stress, at least for me. Like I'm used to this sort of day-to-day manic stress, and now this sort of low-level chronic stress that's constantly there with the situation going on. I see it in my skin. Like my skin's not happy and I'll apply something and realize like it's a little more effervescent than it usually is. So too, that sometimes it's a puzzle too of sort of how your routine fits together and not necessarily one product or not even one ingredient, but just the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I think something also to consider about sunscreens is like, I think generally when we try a new sunscreen, there's usually a reason, like we're going to a beach or like a vacation. Um, I like it might just be you're getting more UV than normal, and like that's causing some of those signs of irritation. So it can be really tricky to figure this thing out. So like I have a testing room where I test my formulations, and it's a temperature controlled room that's also humidity controlled. And the reason why is like I'll try a formulation and I'll be like, oh, this is like a little bit sticky. But then it's because like that day it was like a little bit more humid.
Yep.
And then I'll try it another day where it's like the humidity is like 10%. I'm like, oh, it's beautiful. So you really need to like keep these conditions the same to sort of like make confident comparisons. Like my hands also get sweaty. So like if I'm nervous about a formulation and my hands get sweaty, then like it affects the way that it feels on dry down. So like even in that like very small system where like I know all the ingredients that are going in. Like the fact that like if I'm nervous or not, testing the product like changes the way that it's going to feel and the way that it dries down and like how sticky it feels on my hand. So sort of like making these um, at times what feel like logical conclusions based on like I used X and then Y happened. A lot of times what that is actually just like time, which is like X happened before Y, hence X caused Y. But that's not always the case. Um, yeah, it's really tricky. Like I it's tough to sort of make these things, these like assumptions as a customer, and like we don't always get the best information. And obviously, like we want to know more, but sometimes like it's not easy or it's not feasible. Um, yeah, so I think my best advice would be to like take a step back, make sure you're enjoying your products. If something isn't working for you, then like it's not working for you. Maybe revisit it in like 3 or 4 months if you really want to. But it's like it's not a reflection on yourself. It's not a reflection on the product. You two just aren't compatible. Timing wasn't right. Um, Maybe you'll meet again on Tinder or something. I don't know.
It's so true though. Timing not being right. I've had that in my life many times where products were just not. I've even revisited older formulas that I have not signed off on because it wasn't up to what I wanted. And then a year later, I find it. And I'm like, oh, and
Yeah.
I'll play around with it. And then I'm thinking like, where, like, what space was I in, or what was going on? But it's so true. And environment is so true. Talking about humidity. But that's why, yeah, no, the number one thing is to have fun with your routine. You have to, and to enjoy it, and for it to serve a purpose for you and you
Mhm.
alone, and not for somebody else online, not for somebody else on social media. Um, but anyway, Stephen, this was so lovely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
And we need to do this again because there's going to be more questions and more topics like I said, the one topic we could have gone for 3 hours and gone back and forth about all the things we talk about and hear about. But I will save this to the stories for 24 hours. It doesn't allow you to save to people Instagram lives, like to my iPad for later use, which annoys me, but I understand they're respecting privacy of the other person joining. Like I do appreciate that. But this will be up for 24 hours, so hopefully everybody can enjoy it. Stephen, seriously, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the education and all the information. And if you didn't see, myself and the entire world is ready for your vitamin C.
It's coming. I've been working very, very hard on it, and it seems like if anything can go wrong, it has, which I guess is the difficulty of sort of trying to do everything in-house. But that's sort of a goal that I really want to achieve with this formulation and this brand or whatever. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been really enjoyable. I'm so sorry to everyone that like we couldn't answer all your questions.
I know. We need like 4 more hours.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll do this again
We need to,
over
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
because I don't think this lockdown is ending anytime soon, and this has
It's not.
been very nice.
It is not. But enjoy your day. Thank you again for your time. And until next time, bye.
All right, bye bye.